Hi AP Econ students, Mr. Muller here, and in today's video, in our fourth unit, looking at labor and poverty and inequality, we're going to start this lesson off talking about the labor market. What factors play into how many people want to work in certain industries and the wages they get? Why is it that if you're a doctor, you make more money than a nurse? Why is it that basketball players get paid more than teachers? We're going to be talking about some of those factors today. Hope you're excited. I'm excited. Let's get started. So, let's quickly go over the factors of production. The three things, even though entrepreneurship is a distant fourth, it's still in the conversation. The main factors of production are land, because you need to build your firm on something. Labor, so that's the people that you hire. And the capital, that's the equipment that you need. That's the initial money you need to start that business. So capital is everything, all the other equipment and resources and raw materials you need to produce your product. So derived demand is the demand for an input, which could be land, labor, or capital, that's used to produce the product that you're trying to get consumers to buy. And the demand, derived demand is the demand for the resources used to make your product. So those are a couple of reminders and terms we need. Now, the two big terms that we need to understand to figure out why people get paid the salary they do in a particular business is marginal product of labor and the value of the marginal product. Marginal product of labor is the change in output, how much more of that good or service can you produce by adding one additional worker. So if I hire one more person, how much more output can I get by hiring one more person? We also have to understand value of marginal product. So the marginal product of an input, so this, multiplied by the price of the output it produces. So the marginal product of hiring of labor multiplied by the price of that good that you're producing. So if I'm making 20 more Big Macs or 20 more computers or 20 more cars, and the price for, let's say, a car is 10,000 JD or dollars or US, and I got 20 more, that's $200,000. I have to figure out what that value of marginal product is. So when the value of the marginal product is higher than the market wage, so the amount of money it takes to hire that person on a week or a monthly or yearly basis based on what the market says that person's wage should be. We'll talk about how that gets derived in a second. Then you're going to hire more workers. So what you do is when the value of the marginal product is higher than the wages of that worker, you keep hiring them until you hit market wage, until the value of the marginal product, the value of the thing they're producing hits market wage. Because again, you want to make sure you're having as much output as possible, so you're making as much profit as possible if you're in a firm. So here's an example. Let's say we are working at a McDonald's, and I got to figure out how many people I need to hire. So if I hire 0 people, I'm getting 0 meals delivered. If I hire 1 person, I get 50, 2, I get 90, 3, I get 120, 4, I get 140, 5, I get 150, and at 6, I don't actually change. There's no the marginal product of labor is 0, the output increase is 0. Maybe if I add a 6th person, there's not enough space for people to work and things don't become very efficient. Now, let's take a look at the value of the marginal product of labor, which is the price per Big Mac meal multiplied by the marginal product of labor. So you take 10 times 50, that's the value of marginal product of labor for 1 worker. 2 workers, 10 times 40, 400. 3 workers, 10 times 30, 300. 10 times 20, 200. 10 times 10 is 100. Now, you keep hiring workers. Let's say it's $100 a day to hire someone to work at McDonald's. So I keep hiring them until the value of the product of labor matches how much they get paid. Because, you might say, wait, why would you do that? You're breaking even on hiring that extra person. They're producing more, but the profits equal their wages. But I'm still getting more supply out. So even though the marginal profit, which is the value of marginal labor minus the wage, is 0, I still have more product out. I'm still working as efficiently as possible. So that's what you do if you're in a firm hiring people. So when you own a McDonald's, this is what you do. So if we're looking at a graphical representation of that, the value of marginal product goes down until it hits the market wage. So you keep hiring people until you hit market wage, until the value of marginal product equals the market wage. Now, where does the demand for labor come from? So how is it that the demand for workers to work in my business, oh yeah, I need lots of people to work in my factory, or lots of people to work in my restaurant, or lots of people to work in my law firm or hospital, or, we're really not hiring people. In fact, we got to get rid of some of you guys. Go. Where does that demand for labor come from? So there are two factors that will shift demand, either to the left or to the right. I'm trying to figure out how you're looking at me. A change in demand for so you could have a change in demand for the product the firm produces. So let's say more people want to buy Big Macs, or want cars, or need to see a doctor, or need legal representation. If there's a higher demand for that product, the demand for labor is going to shift to the right. So, and the firm is going to hire more workers. Again, they hire more workers when the value of the marginal product is higher than the cost of hiring labor. So if you figure out, okay, so the marginal product of labor, if I hire another person because there's more demand for Big Macs, if it's going to be more than the cost of hiring that person, I'm going to add another person. So firms are constantly thinking about, well, where's demand? If we hire someone else, can we get more of an output? And is that going to be better than the cost of hiring them? We're going to add someone. Another factor that can shift demand is a change in the cost of producing the product. If it becomes cheaper to produce that product or to produce that service, then you can hire more labor. Or if that technology makes it more expensive, you're going to fire people. Now, technology can act as a substitution for workers. So I can buy a machine that can do the work of 5 people. And what that does is I can say I'm firing a bunch of people, or I can specialize. It allows for workers to have more specialized skills. So instead of the person who ratchets or nails hammers a nail into something, I can be the person that fixes the machine that hammers nails into something. So this is what that looks like in a graphical representation. An increase in demand, we want to hire more people. A decrease, we're firing people. So those are the two factors that influence it. Now, where does the supply of labor come from? So the supply of labor is how many people want to work in your firm. The supply of labor depends on the wage that's offered and on how individuals want to use their time. So if I'm offering someone 1 JD or $1 or €1 an hour to work in my business, the supply is going to be really low because the wage is really low. But if I'm offering an astronomical amount to work in my firm, the supply is going to be high. Also, it's how people want to use their time. It's called a labor-leisure trade-off. You don't want to work your entire life because then you're just going to burn yourself out. A substitution effect occurs when laborers work more hours at higher wages and substitute labor for leisure. So it's like working overtime. I'm going to work more than 40 hours, which is the average in most countries, or I should say in most Western countries. The average hours per week is 40 hours. So if I work more, I'm substituting my leisure time to work more and make more money. But an income effect is a situation where, let's say I'm in a high-paying job and I get promoted and I'm making more money, and oh man, I don't need to work extra hours. In fact, I can work less, still have the quality of life I want, and get to relax. That's called the income effect. And the interesting thing is, as income rises, you have something called a backward bending labor supply curve happen, where as my income goes up, I don't really need to work as many hours, and I can actually, the graphical representation of this will actually bend backwards. So I'm actually using an income effect to substitute leisure for income. So here's what that looks like. So if my wage is low, I'm going to keep working more and more and more and more and more hours. This would be the supply normally. But let's say I'm hitting a point where my income's getting to a point where I don't need to work as many hours. I can have more leisure time, and that supply curve's actually going to bend backwards, and people are actually going to work less hours as wages increase. That's called the backward bending labor supply curve. That's what we just looked at here. So how does the supply of labor increase or decrease? Where does it come from? The changes in supply of labor can come from three things. Other employment opportunities, so are there better jobs nearby that will pay more? So the supply of labor can go up when there's better opportunities in other cities or other states or provinces or sometimes even countries. So labor will go to those places that have better jobs and better offers. Women entering the workforce can have an increase of the supply of labor, and immigration and migration can increase the supply of labor to particular types of markets and firms. This is a graphical representation of the change in supply. And again, things can increase the supply. Usually it's wages because wages go up. And decrease in supply changes the wages and the quantity goes down. So what are the determinants of supply and demand? How do we get to figure out what is the market wage for a particular business? How do we figure out what teachers make, nurses make, policemen make, lawyers make, doctors make, a construction worker makes? It is just like we talked about in Unit 2, the intersection of supply and demand, equilibrium. When equilibrium is hit, that's where you get the market wage. Now, what can happen is labor can be outsourced. Let's say I'm running a call center and I can make that call center come from India or China or a different country where workers have less of a wage. Then I'm going to be first firing people at my business in Britain or France or Russia or the US or Mexico or something like that. So labor is going to increase and wages are going to decrease. That's what outsourcing of labor will do. It also decreases the price of the product because my costs to produce it are less for my labor, so I can decrease the price of the product. More people will buy it. So in the long run, outsourcing will benefit the consumers of where I'm shipping this good off to and myself as a producer. Now, who it hurts are the people who used to work in my firm in the original country where we started. So there's a lot of ethical questions on outsourcing can be efficient economically, but isn't necessarily ethical. Well, we're really not dealing with the ethics of economics. We're dealing with what's the most economical choice, and outsourcing is economical. That's why so many firms do it. Sometimes you have a situation where you have a monopsony, which is where there's only one buyer for your good. A lot of examples would be a college town, a situation where your business is only geared toward the students in this one little college. So they're the only buyers of it. So here's how wages of workers get determined. So you're going to offer a particular wage, and based on that wage, you're going to have a certain amount of quantity of workers. If I offer a very high wage, there's going to be a large supply of people who want to work in my business, but there's going to be less a demand for me to hire people because those people are expensive. Well, let's say that I can offer a really low wage. Well, I'm going to want a lot of people to work with that lower wage. Why hire one person when I can hire 3 at a lower wage? But the demand's going to be low. So I'm not going to have many people wanting to work for my business because the wages are so low. So what's eventually going to happen is you're going to have an equilibrium where the supply of workers will equal the demand that you need to hire them at, and that's where the equilibrium wage comes from. Now, does this happen realistically in today's world? Not that often, but these factors do contribute to the wages of some workers. So let's look at examples in the real world of how wages can shift for people in various fields. So let's take a look at nurses here. So let's say there's a situation where because of a population of a country is getting older on average, there is a larger need for nurses. There's more need to build hospitals and do at-home care. And so the demand for nurses goes up. When the demand to hire more nurses goes up, the wages of those nurses are going to increase because demand is increasing. But that's only if the supply of nurses is consistent. So let's say there's still only a certain amount of, the supply of nurses isn't going to change. It doesn't shift to the right or the left. Their wages are going to go up because less of a supply, but more of a demand. So the wages will increase for nurses. There's a shortage, you increase wages, more nurses come in, and then that's where you get the wage from. So what if there's a situation where the supply of nurses goes up? So let's say, hey, you can make a lot of money being a nurse, and so more people go to nursing school, more people get degrees in nursing. That means the supply is going to shift to the right. And when there's more people in the particular field, that means that they're going to have to take less wages because, let's say, demand is consistent. So nothing changes that makes firms want to hire more nurses. So when the supply increases, your wage is going to decrease. And this is how supply and demand can work together to figure out why different firms, why different jobs make the wages they do and how they can increase or decrease. So we've talked a lot about how the supply of labor is influenced and the demand for labor. Let's talk about the demand for land and capital. So what role does that play in the production of a good or service? So the demand for land is going to be determined by the value of the marginal product that it creates. So what is the output that gets generated by adding an extra acre or hectare of land? The issue is the supply of land is fixed. There's only so much land in the world, so it's perfectly inelastic. So the price of that land is really going to depend on the demand for that land. Now, how does the demand for that land get determined? Based on economic rent, which is the difference between what a factor of production earns, so what will that land earn if it's used to make cars, computers, Big Macs, and what could it earn in the next best alternative. If I change that park into a McDonald's, is there going to be higher economic, what's going to be the difference in economic rent? So what's the opportunity cost there? And because there are so many other potential uses of property, and especially cities, rents are very high because there is a lot of, the economic rent for cities is high because there's a lot of different uses you can use for that land. A swamp is not going to have a large price on it because there's not a lot of things you could do in a swamp in the middle of nowhere. So that's why the rent or the cost of that particular land would be low. So let's look at what this looks like in a graphical representation. So we have initial demand for a piece of land. And then let's say this is a city. And all of a sudden, that city's having a population boom because there are some particular industries that are starting to develop there. And because more people are moving there, the value of that land is higher, and so the demand for that land shifts. The issue is the supply is perfectly inelastic because there's only so much land, and so the price for that land is going to go up. That's how that works from a graphical representation. But what about capital? So that's the resources that you need to run your business. So the demand for capital is determined by the value of the marginal product that it creates as well. So if I add an extra machine or buy more resources, what's the output for my good or service? Say it is derived demand. So should firms, the question, if you have a business, should you hire more labor? Should you utilize more land, or should you deploy more capital? That's the question that businesses and firms constantly have to be asking. So how they do that is they compare the marginal product per dollar or euro or dinar spent across those three factors of production. So what is that marginal product? How much more output am I going to get, and what is the value of that output? And they do this because the world's always changing. Maybe I need to invest in better equipment. Maybe I need more land. Maybe I need more labor. So they're always thinking about this. They're really determining what's the most bang for their buck. So here's an example. You have let's say McDonald's, and they're trying to think of what they should invest in. More land, more labor, or more capital. Well, the value of the marginal product for labor is 450 dinar or dollars or euros. For land, it's 125,000, and for capital, it's 40,000. So that's how much the marginal product is going to produce if you get one more of each of those different types of factors of production. Now, in the case of land, even though the value of the marginal product is very high, the price for that is very high compared to capital and compared to wages. So what they do is they divide the value of marginal product by the wage or the rental price. And so what you have is the bang for your buck for labor is you're going to get 30 dinar or dollars or euros for hiring another person. You're going to get 25 for that land, but you're going to get 40 if you add in that extra resource. So a business would say, we're going to invest in more capital because the marginal product compared to the cost it will take to buy that capital is more efficient than if we used more land or we hired more labor. So that's our look at how businesses decide on the labor that they have to invest in capital or to invest in land. Hope you learned something you didn't know before. Thanks for watching.